Hello world, my name is Leo and today we are reviewing/discussing The Last Case of Benedict Fox, a Lovecraftian Metroidvania developed and published by Plot Twist. This will be the fourth Metroidvania that I've reviewed on the channel. Those other three, Animal Well, Bow, Path of the Teal Lotus, and Crypt Custodian were really good, and I even called one of them, Crypt Custodian, one of the best Metroidvanias that I have ever played. This one is the opposite of that. The title is not exaggerating. The Last Case of Benedict Fox is truly one of the worst Metroidvanias I've ever played. Heck, it might even be in the running for one of the worst games I've ever played, period. It actually kind of makes me sad, because the trailers looked really cool, showing off a world based in Eldritch lore and aesthetics, and in practice, there are elements here that do work. The art style is pretty good, there's a compelling character or two, the lore isn't bad per se, and I really liked some of the puzzle mechanics, but it's all surrounded by a game that feels so tedious, so janky, so painfully generic, that all of those good things get swallowed up and forgotten in a miasma of boredom and annoyance. But enough preamble, let's go ahead and dive into why I didn't like this game. When it comes to presentation and design, Benedict Fox is a mixed bag. On one hand, the visuals are pretty neat. The cartoonish art style is nice to look at, and lends itself well to some decent animation work, especially at the beginning. The color palette and lighting are also really interesting, mixing shadowed and somewhat muted colors in some areas with some really bright and saturated colors in other areas. The environments can also look really cool. The game takes place across two worlds, Benedict's family manor in the real world, and an otherworldly Lovecraftian dimension created from the memories of Benedict's deceased parents. The manor has a mysterious, secretive aesthetic to it, and makes for a nice hub world to both explore and get upgrades from. The alternate dimension, on the other hand, is twisted and corrupted, made up of disparate regions and broken architecture that constantly twists and turns, passages made out of dark tentacles, doors made out of claws or teeth, and alien flora everywhere. These regions range from one covered in ice, to one that looks like the inner workings of a clock, to a swamp, to one with golden walls covered in paintings. Now, I just praised the visuals a lot, but like I said, it's a mixed bag, and the main problem I have with these regions is that while they might look distinct, they don't feel distinct. Every region feels almost exactly the same when you're moving through them, and as a result, they all just kind of blend together into a homogenized amalgamation where nothing stands out. This was something that I kinda nitpicked with Crypt Custodian, actually, where I'd said that the tile sets felt similar across the different regions. However, that game made up for it in two ways. One was having different mechanics for each region. Like one region was made up of platforms that disappeared and reappeared as you dashed. Another was made up of platforms that kept rotating and you had to hit switches to get them where you wanted. Benedict Fox has no such mechanics. There are some inclines where you slide in the ice region, there's a region with moving platforms, but none of it is enough to make any of them feel truly different. The other way that Crypt Custodian was able to make its regions feel different was enemy variety, since each region has its own set of enemies. Here, Benedict Fox utterly fails. You would think that in a world based on Eldritch mythology, this game would have interesting creature designs for its enemies. But no, instead what we have here is Ink Man, Big Ink Man, Ink Dog, Bigger Ink Dog, Flying Thing, Giant Bug that births flying things, which is the only visually interesting design in the game, and that's it. There are also some humans in gas masks and stuff, but those are humans, not eldritch horrors. There's no weird or wild designs, no horrifying creatures, nothing that fully takes advantage of the world that the game is based in. What's more, these enemies are spread out throughout all of the various regions. There are no region-specific enemies. It's all just the same general pool of enemy types. The result of all of this is that despite the vast well of lore and mythology to pull from, this world feels painfully generic and completely lacking in any creativity. And I feel like the bosses are the perfect cherry on top for this point. So, this game only has 3 bosses, 2 chase sequences, and 1 stealth sequence. The first boss is this massive anglerfish monster with tentacles. It's a really cool design, and seeing this might lead you to believe that the other bosses are going to be like that. Nope. The only other thing that comes close is the stealth sequence, which is against a massive spider thing with a spotlight. The other 2 bosses are just humans with supernatural abilities. As for the chases, the first chase sequence is against a dragon-looking thing, but you only see its head, and you barely even see that most of the time because you're running from it. The second chase is against a smoke tornado, and that's it. I truly couldn't believe how uninspired most of this game felt, and how much of its potential was squandered. Moving on from visuals to audio, the music isn't particularly memorable. There's a record player in the mansion, and that music is good, but the main exploration and combat music are all just forgettable. More problematic than that, though, is the overall sound design, which can be really hit or miss. The gun sounds, for example, are fine. The knife sounds, however, less so. Some of the cutscenes also feel like they're either lacking or straight up missing appropriate sounds, making them tonally feel a bit awkward at points.
I will be your end. And I will be yours.
There's one more thing I want to talk about in this section before we move on, and that's performance. I don't usually talk about performance because I have a higher end PC and I use custom settings most of the time, so I know my performance might not be reflective of other people's performance. I usually only say something if performance is bad, or if there are bugs. And Benedict Fox has both. In terms of performance, I think this game has a memory leak or something, because every time I had a play session that lasted longer than a couple of hours, I would start getting frame rate hitches that would slowly get worse the longer I played, and in order to fix it, I would have to quit out of the game and restart. In terms of bugs, you know that anglerfish boss? Here's what happened during my first attempt. This led to me being able to sequence break the game, but I ended up being on a different layer of the environment somehow, so I had to quit and restart anyway. Here's another clip of me pushing an elevator up with my head to be able to do some more sequence breaking and get some collectibles slightly earlier than intended. There's also typos and missing punctuation in some of the subtitles, and even one part where the subtitles were straight up unfinished, which I've never seen before in a fully released game that's like 2 or 3 years old by this point.
But then she lost her father. She felt she lost her husband. And in the end, she lost hope.
These bugs are funny, but it also just highlights how low quality and janky this game feels, and unfortunately, that low quality jank will become a trend throughout the rest of this review. The story of Benedict Fox is one of tragedy. Not only in terms of its content, but also in the sense that it would be much better if everything surrounding it was more interesting. You play as Benedict Fox, a detective who is bound to an eldritch entity called the Companion. The Companion is easily one of the best parts of this game. The voice is appropriately raspy and mysterious, and even though he's rarely seen on screen, his voice has enough of a presence to make every line sound excellent, which is a rarity in this game, but we'll come back to that later.
This table used to bring the whole family together. I can still smell the aroma of their favorite coffee, the taste of good wine, and of their laughter, Benedict.
Together, Benedict and the Companion travel through the memories of Benedict's parents, trying to figure out what happened to them, and trying to uncover the secrets of a certain ritual that his father was working on. The lore that makes up the backdrop of this game is actually pretty interesting. Through dialogue, photographs, notes, etc., you learn about how Benedict's parents were in a cult, trying to open portals and harness the power of the Lovecraftian dimension, and how that cult was disbanded by a separate cult run by the church's inquisitors. It's a bit hard to follow, but like I said, it's interesting. The story beats themselves are fine, I guess, nothing really all that special. It mainly consists of trying to find journal pages and vinyl records throughout the memory world, as well as reliving some of your parents' memories to slowly piece together what happened. Again, I feel like it would be better if everything else around it was more interesting. There are also side quests you can do, and those range from clearing out enemy camps, to discovering the location of a golem and finding the ingredients to bring it back to life, to just finding items for people. The main problem with these is that they very rarely had any kind of satisfying payoff. For example, the golem quest. Even though you gather the ingredients to bring it to life, you don't actually bring it to life, and you never see it brought to life throughout the entire game. For the enemy camp quest, you can use a radio to talk to a church cult member that you used to be friends with. When you clear the last camp, you find out that that person has been removed from their position by the cult for their bias, and then this exchange happens.
Please focus on the tasks at hand.
Son of a bitch.
Hold on to your anger for later. We might need it, Benedict.
So yeah, this questline just kinda ends, and that's what most of the quests feel like, if I'm being honest. Now, with that clip in particular, you might have noticed that despite the Companion saying that Benedict was angry, the actual line read from Benedict didn't sound that way. In fact, it didn't really have that much emotion at all. And that's a pretty good segue into the biggest problem I have, the voice acting. Besides the Companion and a couple of other characters, the voice acting in this game is absolutely atrocious. Benedict's line delivery is constantly flat and monotone, completely devoid of any emotion or investment. This might actually be somewhat intentional, since in the game, Benedict has to keep control of his emotions to keep his connection to the Companion stable. However, the end result is that his delivery has a hard time sounding natural or believable, and since he talks for most of the game, it was really hard to get immersed in any emotion I was supposed to be feeling.
Okay, I get it. I'm sorry for my outburst. You were just so close when he took the book. Talk to me, please.
Even more jarring than him, though, is this tattoo artist lady. She's your main source for upgrades, so you'll hear her voice fairly often too. and all of her lines sound like they're from a table read of the script, with how stilted and off they sound.
This is not a question you should be asking a lady, especially in this day and age. By the way, what year is it?
It's 1925, ma'am.
Of course it is. Oh, it's really 1925. Silly me. I need to set my watch then.
These two voices alone are so noticeably bad that it has a big impact on everything around it. Like I said, the story and lore could have been interesting, but these voices and the lack of satisfying payoffs, combined with the generic feeling that I talked about in the previous section, really drag it all down into something that's barely memorable. And that's all before I get into the actual gameplay of Benedict Fox, which has just as many problems, so let's move on to that. As a Metroidvania, Benedict has a lot of the gameplay elements you'd expect. Platforming, exploration, combat, puzzles, and upgrade-based progression system, the works. Just like with the previous two sections, I'll get the positives out of the way first. As you're exploring out in the world, you'll often come across puzzles that you'll need to solve in order to progress through an area or get an item. These range from solving riddles using tarot cards that you've collected, to putting sets of keys in a specific order, to using a mysterious device to interpret and solve number puzzles. These were genuinely fun to engage with. They managed to scratch my brain in just the right way, and had just the right amount of challenge to them to where I felt like I was able to solve everything on my own without the game trying to hold my hand through it. There were also some doors that required a sequence of button presses. These were simple, but they looked really cool, which made them more fun. Besides the companion, I'd say these parts were my favorite elements of the game, and I want to give that credit where it's due. The way progression works is also not too bad. Your Eldritch abilities from the companion help with both platforming and combat, and those upgrades come via the Tattooist, which is a novel idea, having the upgrades tattooed on your arms as you progress.
This one.
Good choice, my dear.
You also have healing and consumable items, which can be upgraded through a shop, which is fairly standard stuff. As for your weapons, you upgrade those at a smith, and those are done by finding certain items out in the world. I will say though, that the animation for these smith upgrades is really lackluster, and made the process much less exciting.
Good. Let's get to work.
The upgrades themselves are, again, all standard stuff. You have a double jump, a move that lets you get past certain walls, slam and throw abilities using your tentacles in combat. It's all fine for what it is. Platforming is, again, very standard. But speaking of combat though, that's where it all falls apart. Combat in Benedict Fox feels janky as hell. Your main weapons are a melee attack with a knife, and every hit from the knife charges your gun, which you can use to shoot enemies for big damage. Both of these weapons lack any weight or impact, and just feel really imprecise overall. You also have a shield to block attacks, as well as your tentacle abilities, which are cool to use, but the thing is, the gun and knife are the most reliable because the bigger the enemies get, the less effective your tentacle attacks become. This meant that in later parts of the game, I actually kind of forgot to use my abilities because the knife and gun were just more consistent. And again, because the knife and gun feel janky as hell, combat most of the time just doesn't feel good. Furthermore, if you get hit by bigger enemies or attacks, the camera will shake and you will be sent flying backward, becoming animation locked until you're able to get up. This can lead to you getting stun locked by multiple attacks, and is also just super disorienting, making combat even more of a chore, especially as you progress and encounter more of these types of enemies. To be fair though, I wasn't doing a lot of combat in the later parts of the game anyway, and that's purely because of how the ink system works. So ink is the currency that you use for your tattoo upgrades, and you get ink by defeating enemies. There's actually some interesting ideas here, because any ink you collect has to be banked at these teleportation portals so that you can keep it. If you don't bank it, you risk losing the ink if you die and having to go retrieve it again, and if you fail to retrieve it, the ink goes back to the enemies you got it from. I never lost any ink, so I didn't get to experience this for myself, but I wanted to acknowledge that that is interesting. Here's the kicker though. You only get ink from enemies the first time you defeat them. Enemies start out purple, but once you collect their ink, they become orange, and they have less health overall. This means that you get literally nothing from enemies if you've already defeated them once. And because of how much backtracking this game has, you'll run into a lot of those defeated enemies more and more often, especially as you make progress. I can only assume this was implemented as a way to prevent the player from power scaling too fast, but the unintentional result is that these enemies become purely sources of annoyance, trying to impede your progress. Because of this, and because of the janky feel of the combat, I felt no incentive to engage with any of the enemy mobs in the later half of the game. So unless they were actually in my way, I just jumped over or ran past them. The later I got into the game, the more I actively tried to avoid the combat as much as I could. Even more than the normal enemy mobs, the bosses and chases in this game are such a disappointment, and I want to go through these one at a time because they all have problems. I already showed you the bug that occurred during the anglerfish fight, but even without the bug, this is easily one of the worst bosses in any game I've ever experienced. The lack of weight and impact is on full display here, as it doesn't even feel like you're doing damage a lot of the time. What's more, the windows to block or dodge some of the attacks are variable, so reacting to them starts to feel less like you're learning the boss and more like just pure luck that you'll have a wide enough window to do something. Next, let's break down the two chases. The one against the dragon is like 15 seconds long and ends incredibly abruptly.
Nothing here is what it seems, Benedict.
Yeah, there's much more to Mrs. Floyd than we thought.
The one against the smoke tornado feels incredibly cheap because the path feels like it intentionally tries to mislead you, and if you land on the wrong platform, you just insta-die and restart. Next, we have the first human boss fight. This one is optional, and you actually fight him 4 times. The first 3 times, he has a shield up, as well as a barrier that traps you in the area you're in. You can't actually hit him, so you have to run around the area destroying objects that are allowing him to travel to this dimension. Then, after a certain point, the game allows you to make enhanced bullets, which can break his shield, and then after that, he just goes down in a few hits. Again, ending really abruptly. And then the second human boss, which acts as the final boss of the game, is again just so janky, with attacks that constantly ragdoll you, cheap shots from attacks that sometimes just spawn on you, and it all culminates in a janky, unsatisfying ending cutscene. I cannot stress enough just how terminal all of this is, and just how unfun it makes this whole experience from start to finish. I want to end this review by making something very clear, and it's something I believe I've said at least once before in a previous review. I don't like trashing on games for the sake of trashing on them. I know there's a lot of that in the gaming content creation space these days, and the last thing I want to do is contribute to it. Whenever I talk about games like this, I do my best to focus on the positives and the negatives, trying to genuinely critique it rather than baselessly dogpile on it. Throughout this review, I've talked about things that I like about this game. There were elements that truly had potential, like the companion, the puzzles, the lore, and the art style. However, the bad elements of this game are so aggressively bad and so present in every single moment that it can't help but stand out beyond anything the good elements can bring to the table. I am just one person though, and the game is currently sitting at mostly positive on Steam, so clearly some people do enjoy it, and I encourage you to seek those opinions out as well if you want a more well-rounded impression. For me though, the title of this video says it all. The Last Case of Benedict Fox is, without exaggeration, one of the worst Metroidvanias I've ever played, and I do not recommend it. Thank you all so much for checking out my review. This was a fun one to make. It's been a while since I've played a game that was like this bad, and it's not very often that I get to play bad games overall. And hey, out of all the bad games I reviewed on the channel, at least I finished this one, which is more than I can say for Ravenlock and Starfield. So if you enjoyed this review, please feel free to leave a comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts on everything I've said. If you've played this game, I would love to hear about your own experience, what you liked, what you didn't like. Also feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't. My Ko-Fi and Discord are in the description if either of those interest you. Thanks again, and I will see you guys next time.